From analog.
Hi, Jim. You've a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
You're digital.
We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the May 2024 edition of the Blind Hams Techzoom, presented each and every month on the second Thursday. And we do it at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the Blind Techzoom room. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can find out how to get there when we have these events by going to blindhams.com. There's a link there right in the main page, and we hope you'll join us next time around. I'm WB2KTV Steve, located in New York City, Manhattan, just south of Midtown. We used to be able to see the Empire State Building from our bedroom window, but somebody had the unmitigated audacity of building a big, tall building right across the street. It has now blocked our view, but that's where we are in New York. I am primarily a UHF and VHF person. Don't do any HF here in the home, in the apartment, but that will segue perfectly into our topic of discussion for the evening, which is a very unique antenna, and we'll have the presentation on that in just a minute or two. First, I'd like to introduce the Blind Hams Techzoom podcast team. Let's start with Joel, W0CAS from Pelzer, South Carolina.
Welcome to the Techzoom for this month. We've got an exciting host tonight. Going to share some funny stories, I hope, and some funny antennas that he's been playing with. And we're looking forward to it. So back to you, Steve.
Okay. Next in line is our newest addition to the Blind Hams Techzoom team, Steve, W0QA, keeper of the newest addition to our podcast feed, the Blind Hams News. Good evening, Steve.
Well, good evening. We've last week issued Blind Ham News podcast number 3, and it's part 1 of a multiple-part series on call signs. Where did our call letters come from? How did we get them? And what story is there behind those call signs? So we've got that online. If you haven't heard it yet, you might want to check it out. We shoot for doing one podcast a month unless a whole bunch of stories come our way. And so the next podcast, number 4, will come out right around the 1st of June. If you have ideas for the podcast, and I've received a couple of ideas recently, there are 2 ways you can submit your stories. There's an email address. It's very easy to remember, blindhamnews@gmail.com. It's blindhamnews@gmail.com. And if you'd rather just call in and voice your story ideas, we have a voicemail box set up, and that number is 662-426-6397. If those numbers get confusing and you can't remember them, it's easier than that. 662-HAM-NEWS. So what's your ham radio story like? Do you have an interesting story about ham radio, your involvement in the hobby? And one of the suggestions that came our way was that maybe you got involved in the hobby and then you went away for a while for some reason. So if that happened to you, and it kind of happened to me a few years ago, but if it happened to you, why did you go away? How long were you away? And what brought you back? So if you got that kind of a story, would like to share it with us, we'd like to hear from you. So that's kind of where things are at with the new Blind Ham News podcast. Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Steve, W0QA from Wichita, Kansas. Now let's head a little bit further south and talk to Robert, NC5R. Good evening to you, sir. How are things in College Station, Texas?
Well, good evening, Steve and everybody. Things are okay here. We're battling lots of water. We've had lots of rain like a lot of other people around the country, but we're working our way through it. Gonna have to get some work done on our lawn, maybe install a French drain and all kinds of fun stuff. Radio-wise, not much going on for me right now. I have had my HF radios unplugged for the last 2 weeks. Too much lightning. Other than that, I'm looking forward to the antenna presentation. Back to you, Steve.
Okay. And I have to ask, what's a French drain?
Oh, it's a fancy piping system that routes the water away from your house so that it doesn't flood when it pours the rain.
Oh man, I could think of a few other people that could probably use one of those. All right, that about does it for the Blind Hams TechZoom team. Let's talk about antennas. Tonight we have the presence of Ben VE6SFX Sierra Fox X-Ray from Alberta, up there in the northwest portion of Canada, a little bit further west than Saskatchewan, a little bit further east than British Columbia, kind of right in the middle. And he has a couple of interesting ideas about an antenna that he has created called the Fara J. That's right, not Faraday, but Fara J. But Faraday figures quite highly in it. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ben. Ben, it is all yours. Tell us who you are and what you got going on up there.
Hey, Steve. Can you? I just want. Yeah, okay. My mic didn't come up there right away. My apologies. Yeah. Geez, the antenna. So, like, I'm a new ham. I've only been licensed for like about 14 months. Although I just got my advanced here up in Canada. And I've always wanted to kind of mess around and play with it. And so, yeah, I got my basic ham license, and of course, first thing a lot of people do is get an HT. And looking on YouTube and everything, and everybody was talking about, like, how the J-pole seems to be the number one antenna to kind of make for UHF and VHF, and I was monkeying around with that, and I started going down a rabbit hole of copper pipe and all these sorts of things, and it was all heavy and fairly large manufacturing stuff. And if you look at like my background, special effects in movies, like the practical effects where I literally will blow up cars or flip them over, or giant rotating sets. And so fabrication kind of things are not a big deal for me, but I was always looking at this going, like, I've got this hand-sized radio, and I'm building this antenna that's a meter plus long, and it weighs 15 times the amount that the HT was, and it just didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. But at the same time, I didn't like the rubber duckies. You can't get the range that you wanted on them. And while I was kind of just monkeying around and going on YouTube, John Portune, I stumbled across a few of his presentations, and he started talking about using copper foil tape or aluminum foil tape. And while he was saying that, I had a J-pole that was sitting in front of me, which is just basically a meter and a half long J that's about 2 inches wide. And there's some duct tape on my desk because of basically I'm manufacturing and making stuff all the time. So I got a bunch of these things sitting in front of me, and he's talking about copper tape. And it occurred to me that if I got really narrow copper tape or aluminum tape, that I could probably just put it onto the duct tape. And I wonder if that would make an antenna. So, of course, you hit Amazon immediately and order a bunch of stuff that you don't really need, but it turned out to actually be a really good investment on my part. So I ended up getting some duct tape, and what I end up doing is you take one strip of duct tape that's about 2 meters long, and you take a second strip of duct tape that's about 2 meters long, and you laminate them sticky side to sticky side. So you end up with this sort of plastic ribbon that you can attach things to. And at that point, I had it's about 10 millimeters. So what do we got? It's a little more than a 1/4 inch wide strip of copper foil tape. And I traced out the dimensions of a standard J-pole antenna onto this duct tape. And I used the foil tape to do this. Connecting to this copper foil tape, and I've played with it before, is that you can solder to it, but you got to be like really quick touch because you're going to melt whatever's behind it. And again, John Portune, on some of his podcasts and stuff, he shows how he ended up using neodymium magnets as a connector just on the end of some crimp connectors on the end of a wire. So you take wire itself, put a crimp connector onto it, and then you can get like an M3 or a number 4 machine screw and get neodymium magnets that will, basically bolt onto the, like, oh, sorry, I bumped my mic. You can get these neodymium magnets with holes in them, and you can run the bolt through that, and then through the eye crimp, and tighten it down with a nut. And just on the back side of the duct tape, you just have a second magnet, so it pinches the electrical connection down onto the copper foil. And the one thing that I really liked about this is that it allowed me to play with where the feed point was. And everybody talks about how there can be multiple feed points, or that, maybe you want to feed it not necessarily exact lengths along the long leg of the J pole and the short leg. So I was able to monkey around and play with that because of this little setup. And those two wires, of course, go to, I just had like reasonably short leads, and I'd hook them into a BNC connector, which then would attach to a BNC cable to my radio. And so I went out into my backyard, and while I was doing this, I ended up doing it for my YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel's Ham Radio Rookie, seeing as I'm brand new. I figured, okay, well, this will be kind of tongue in cheek and kind of fun. I didn't know if it would work. I had high hopes it would, but like anything that you build and you're trying out the first time, you're not sure. So I figured, well, might as well get my initial real reaction of this. So I, hit record on my phone and hung up the antenna and keyed up my mic, and be damned if it didn't work straight out the gate. It sounded absolutely wonderful, and I broke down in a fit of giggles because it was just like, it's so absurd. I'm making an antenna that everybody's trying to get, that is high gain, out of duct tape, and they're making stuff out of copper pipe. Mine costs like, pennies. Well, not pennies, maybe a couple dollars. And so I was pretty excited over that, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. And I made a few of them, and of course I rolled them up and threw them in my pocket, because if you go to a ham radio club or something like that, and people are talking about like high gain antennas, or they've got the signal stick on their HT, and I pull out this little fabric thing and I pin it up near a window and hook up my HT to it. It's got really good gain. And the reason why it has good gain, and this might be a little sort of a side note, is that with skin effect, with a lot of the radio signals, is that a lot of the reason why you'd want to use copper pipe is that the skin effect capitalizes on the surface area of the copper pipe. Well, if you've got a flat piece of tape, it's like, let's say it's a 1/4 inch wide. Well, that would be the equivalent circumference wire, which is something like 8 gauge or something ludicrous, where it's really big and fat and heavy, and that gives you a large bandwidth on top of a really good gain. So these antennas perform way, like they punch way above their anybody that looks at them can't believe how well they work. I've gotten 30-40 miles out of some of these, and other YouTubers like Ham Radio Tube and even Josh Nash have gotten equivalent distances with an antenna that's about 10 feet off the ground, with a short coax to it. But the problem that I was coming across while I was doing all of this is that I was thinking, I had the duct tape antenna that was in my pocket, and after opening and closing it, like say 40 or 50 times, and of course because I'm showing it off to everybody, it took me about 2 weeks, and the copper started to fatigue and crack. And so at that point I realized, well, it's a great antenna, but it's a temporary antenna, and people would have to be making these constantly, and trying to work out the feed point too. Going back to the feed point and the magnets, is that I realized that like once I found a good feed point and I marked it, I might as well just use some machine screws and screw these ring terminals that I crimped onto the end of the wire, just bolt them directly to the cloth. And again, this sort of stuff would end up fatiguing the duct tape and everything, and so it didn't have a long life, is basically what I'm getting down to. And so I was monkeying around, taking a look at stuff, and again, looking at some of the YouTube videos that I'd seen before, and I came across, geez, I can't remember the guy's name, but there was somebody who, instead of using, he was using metal screen as a counterpoise on his antennas, and he said that you could get this stuff called Faraday fabric and use it instead, and that it worked really, really well. And I was thinking, well, geez, I wonder if I could get that Faraday fabric, and if I sew it onto other fabric, if it's durable, then this antenna would have a little bit more life to it, quite a bit more life to it. So of course I ordered some of that Faraday fabric, and it was about a day later, while I was still kind of Googling this stuff, I realized that they made Faraday tape, which is effectively the cloth with an adhesive back and different widths. And that is almost exactly like that copper foil tape that I was using. And I at that point, my head just about exploded. I'm like, oh my God, this is it. So what I ended up doing is I was experimenting with sewing it to some tent material and awning material. But I was thinking, what sort of ribbon could I use? And I was looking at different things. And there's these, on a hat, you have a hat band, and it's called gross grain ribbon. And it's about 1.5 inches wide, or you can get it 1 inch wide or 2 inch wide, but it's pretty durable. It's also UV stabilized. And I thought, well, okay, so I grabbed a roll of this stuff. You can buy it at a lot of different hobby stores, and I attached this Faraday tape to it, and replicated the design. But it didn't come without a little bit of monkeying around, because Faraday tape doesn't behave like copper foil does. Because it's a bunch of capacitively coupled fibers, it doesn't transmit, or it doesn't run frequencies the same way. So the antenna itself needed to be a little bit longer, and the feed point needed to change. So there's a little bit of kind of back and forth. But the advantage to using the Faraday tape over top of wire, over top of copper pipe, is that I can cut it to length, and if it's too short, you can literally tape over top of the first piece. And because the fibers are capacitively coupled, as long as you overlap, let's say 1/2 inch at the minimum, you're gonna effectively make a electrical connection between the top and the bottom half. So you can very quickly, everybody says make your J pole extra long and slowly cut it back, but just like everybody, I've done that with the 300 ohm and the 450 ohm lead or feed line, and invariably you'll cut it too short and just be going, damn it, I was so close and I just went too far. But with the tape, you can always just add a little more length to it. So while I was mucking around, I found the perfect sort of distances, or the lengths and everything, to make that happen. And while I was doing this, because again, with my work with special effects, I've had to make my own circuit boards and robotics, and I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. My background's aeronautical engineering, but I grew up in a farming community. I've always had to pull wrenches and build things, and look around at what you've got near you and see what you can do. So I decided that a circuit board would be the best way to do this, and solder on a BNC connector, and that would allow me to keep the leads from the BNC to the antenna short, which is a definite advantage. It makes it a little more efficient. So I glue the circuit board down onto this gross grain ribbon, and be darned if it works just as good, if not a little better than the copper foil tape. So yeah, I put out a video on sort of like the upgraded version of this antenna that I had made, and said, hey, if anybody's interested in this stuff, would you like to buy one? Because like I know that not everybody can sew, and I can sew, and I've got access to people who can sew and stuff, so I can make a few of these and see if I got like a little side job on that. And 2 weeks later, my email list was 1,700 people long. That was like,
Wow.
my jaw dropped and I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. I was thinking this is going to be a side gig, but maybe. And I figured, okay, well, out of 1,700, how many people are actually going to buy? So I figured, okay, well, I'll see if I can make like 50 and I'll put them up on a website. And I did that and they sold out in 20 minutes, which blew me away. And then I figured, okay, well, I better make a bigger batch and see if I can sell those. And so I made a bigger batch of 100 and it took me a couple of weeks because like I'm learning how to mass manufacture all these things. And I put them up on the website and they sold out within the hour. And ever since then, this last week is the first week ever since I started making these, and I have I think close to 600 antennas out in the wild now. Is that once I put them up for sale, that the stock remained there longer than an hour. So
Impressive.
yeah, and like there's other applications. My latest video was in one of my videos I said that like this is a 2-meter 70 centimeter, kind of making the assumption that like every 2-meter antenna should resonate at 70 centimeters as it's one of the harmonics. I think it's a third harmonic down or up. And the antenna does work at that, but just not all that great, but it does work. So I had to, eat a little bit of crow and say like, well, yes, I did say, 2-meter, 70 centimeter antenna, but in reality, it's not. It's really a dedicated 2-meter antenna. And in a pinch, it'll work on 70 centimeters.
Are you planning a 70 centimeter model?
I just made one actually about a week or so ago, and it works incredibly well. And that will be sort of my, my second antenna that I'll be putting up for sale.
Your companion piece, if you will.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do things like if you buy a 2-meter antenna and a 70 centimeter antenna, there will be a discount. I'm not sure exactly how much, but there's a lot of people who will have HTs will kind of want to have both, or at least maybe, I don't know. It all depends on your applications and whether you work in both built up areas or you're looking for long distance. But with all of this, while all of this is going on, I still wanted to keep my YouTube channel and stuff going. And I was monkeying around and there I was at a Halloween party and a friend of mine said, I was talking how I made a piece of duct tape an antenna, and he goes, well, it sounds like you could make anything an antenna. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, you're a ham radio operator. Then can you make a can of ham an antenna?
Oh boy.
And I laughed and I stopped and I thought about this for a second and I'm like, you know what? I think I might be able to do this. So I did this tongue-in-cheek thing where I have a couple of videos where I call it Will It Ham. And I took a tin of ham. So you can get tins of ham that are sort of triangular in shape, and they're about 6 inches long and say 3 inches or maybe 4 inches wide at its widest point. And on the side, you have these little tabs that you can roll out the side of the can, and it separates the two halves. And you can, you get that slurping as you pull the two pieces apart. And I thought that with John Portune, and again, John Portune is like, I'm absolutely amazed at all of his work and his slot antennas and dealing with tape and looking at different ways of building things. And I've reached out to him and we chat once in a while now. And that's one thing I love about the ham radio community is everybody's so very friendly. Of course there's always the exception, but for the most part, it's amazing. Like I tell people, I've never in person met a bad ham, but they sure exist in my comment section of my videos, but I've never met one. So at any rate, back to the ham can. So you've got these two pieces of metal and you can make like a slot antenna out of it. And I thought, well, I wonder how, like for a 70 centimeter antenna, you need something that's about 70 centimeters long in total. And be darned if that tin of ham wasn't exactly 70 centimeters. So all I ended up having to do is make some 3D printed standoffs. So you have the two pieces of this cut off tin. So imagine if you open up a regular can of soup and open up a second can of soup, that would be the equivalent of the two halves of this can. and you can separate them with some 3D printed parts, or like, you could even go as far as to just a chunk of wood or a piece of foam, just to and little tiny pieces, just to make little spacers to keep everything separated. And that created the slot. But to make a true slot antenna, you have to bridge the two halves. So again, came in the copper foil tape, and I attached one of those magnetic BNC adapters that I had built with my J-pole, and I took it out and I put it on my Nano VNA, and I'm getting goosebumps right here because I still to this day, and the antenna sitting in front of me, it completely blew me away because it was so very little work. It resonated perfectly in the 70 centimeter band, like perfectly. We're talking like below 1.1 across the entire band. And I'm just like, okay, no way. I'm probably, my VNA is probably not calibrated. Something. It's just too good to be true. So again, I grabbed my phone and I figured I'd give myself the best chance, since I live a little ways from one of the 70 centimeter repeaters near me. And this is before I started getting to know a lot of the community and finding out who would be near me to do simplex. So I was kind of like annoying everybody in my city on the repeaters by doing a bunch of antenna tests, but they patiently deal with me, and I have to thank them for that. So at any rate, I get to about 2 kilometers, so a mile away from this 70 centimeter repeater, and I set things up and I key up and it ka-chunks, and I'm just like, no way. And then I come in and I give my call sign, and somebody comes back right away and gives me full quieting, and I'm just like, again, at this point, I'm in the middle of this dog park with a ham can hot glued to the top of a PVC pipe that's stuck into the ground. I'm holding a radio, and I'm just about falling over laughing. And this lady walks by and she's like, "Are you okay?"
Boy.
It's just absurd. But at that point, I realized that, like, I think a lot of people and this is in a lot of industries and on everything, every hobby, is people get stuck looking at things going, well, that isn't a dedicated antenna, so it can't be an antenna. But go out and look at metal objects, or look at metal tape, or even something I did recently is I took a carbon fiber rod that I have. I also do like radio controlled aircraft and stuff. So I had a piece of carbon fiber rod, and everybody talks about how carbon fiber is the evil and the bane of all antennas. And I'm like, well, just like Faraday cloth, everybody thought that Faraday cloth or Faraday fabric is meant to stop radio signals, but nobody stopped to think about that it does conduct. Well, if it conducts, then it should be able to be made into an antenna. So this carbon fiber shaft, and this will be one of my videos coming up, actually makes a pretty reasonable 2-meter antenna. And it's just it's an 18-inch whip, and it's just a piece of carbon fiber. So
Wild.
So like, again, this is one of those things where you got to look outside the box and think, if it's conductive, then you should be able to make an antenna out of it. And all of this led to, with the Willet ham, the second episode is I figured I'd make fun of the tinfoil hat wearing kind of people, and I made a tinfoil hat. But it turns out that, like, if you look at a tinfoil hat, the cap that goes over your head is much like a ground plane. And if you can separate it from the mast, or the whip that just comes out the top, or a spire that comes out the top. So imagine taking aluminum foil and creating a helmet over top of your head. And once you've done that, is you leave like a little bit of a gap or a circle on the top that you'd be able to pass a connector through. And of course, I didn't wear this tinfoil hat. I want everybody to understand this. And in my video, I go through this, is that you do not want to wear a hat transmitting RF signals. This is a great way to cook your brain. It's not, I'm pretty sure that, at very low power and stuff, our cell phones are held up against our face. It's probably not going to hurt you, but why try and find out? So I have a 3D printed head of that I can use, and it's hollow. So I place a cap over the top of it that's made out of aluminum foil with this little hole on the top. Then with the hole on the top, I just used a SO239 connector, and I attached the outside of it to that cap. So I've got the grounding or the ground plane. And then coming straight up through the center of that SO239 is I just wrap some more aluminum foil in a little spire or a spike off the top. Sort of the trope of aluminum foil hats. And I created a whip off the top of it that was, geez, I'm trying to think of how long I made it because I don't even have it anymore. Or it's probably in my garage somewhere. But I think it was like...
I could definitely envision something like that. It sounds easy to build. All you need is the thing to mount the hat, for lack of a better word, something to mount it on, and then you put a rod up through the middle, and
exactly.
a SL239 PL2. There you go.
Yep. So I've got the spire coming off the top, and again, let the camera roll and see if it works. And the absurdity of it, my neighbor was outside in his backyard, or like we've got chain link fence between us, so you can see us. A really friendly guy. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's always known me as a weirdo because like I work in special effects, so I end up doing some pretty strange things in my garage. So he's like, "What are you doing?" And I explain it to him, and I just ended up transmitting on it, and be darned if it didn't work. But this one buckled me right over. I couldn't believe it. Like it's just completely absurd. So I was saying, like, the tinfoil hat people is that, the tinfoil isn't what you think. It's a giant antenna. So like Big Pharma can get into your head. And yeah. But then, yeah, my at this point, my head's always exploding with different ways to make antennas. So people that live in built up areas, I can't remember, one of the Steves I think lives in New York.
That would be me.
Yeah, okay. So having a HOA and having antennas is always a pain. So I don't think anybody would ever complain if you were hanging a flag that was the red, white, and blue out of or off your balcony. Well, what I did in one of my other videos is taking that fabric tape again, is I made a Yagi I just sewed it onto a flag. And so I call it the Flaggy, and I'm making a commercially available one here shortly. But basically what it comes down to is that with a standard flag, you can get a high gain Yagi, and granted it's directional, but you can have an antenna that you can hang off your deck that no one would ever know that is an actual antenna that can transmit. And with this fabric, or the Faraday fabric, what's really interesting is because it's a bunch of woven fibers. A lot of people, one of the first questions I get asked is how many watts can it handle? And it can handle way more than you think. We've driven 50 watts digital continuous through one of my J poles, and the reason why it can handle this is that it's not like your standard chunk of metal that will warm up. It's a bunch of fibers that let air come in and out. So it's its own radiator. It cools itself off. I had a FLIR camera pointed at the antenna when we were testing it to see if there was anything that was heating up. And the only thing that got warm was the BNC connector. It had, the antenna was fine. It didn't even blink. So, there's all sorts of different applications to this stuff. I know that there's some, fire services and search and rescue, and the military were a couple of those branches have talked to me saying, can you make antennas for us? Because like they're lightweight, you can throw them in your pocket. If they damage, you can literally tape over the damage to repair them. They weigh nothing. I think that's the biggest thing is that, for anybody that does SOTA or POTA, or, goes out camping or does any mobile operations whatsoever, is something like this, that my antennas, my 2-meter antenna weighs 1.2 ounces with the BNC connector and everything all in. I don't know of any
connector. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know of any other antenna that that is that lightweight that can handle that much power and that easy to deploy. So, but yeah, I guess that's my sort of antenna ham radio journey, and all focused on the antennas. It, I've got a few more coming out. There's again, John Portune. I don't know. I just love the guy and his ideas. He's got a book on Amazon. I think it's a Kindle book only, or maybe you can get it in paper. I'm not sure, but highly recommend that you anybody goes out and gets this book. And it's on slot antennas. I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head, but the slot antennas are a fascinating antenna because instead of having a long vertical or a long horizontal, is that you literally have a continuous loop of metal, and inside that loop, the actual diameter of the loop needs to be about the wavelength of whatever band you're on. And you can find feed points, you can bridge over these feed points, and the direction that you feed it. So like, say if you have a slot that is, say, 2 inches wide and 39 inches long, that's about what a 2-meter antenna would be. Now, if you bridge between the 2-inch gap with a BNC or with a wire, you find a feed point that's at 50 ohms. And there's a couple of different places you can find it on these antennas. It's kind of interesting where you can sort of imagine where these wave points and everything are. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent, is that once you hook the BNC up to that, is the direction that the wire is bridging those two pieces is effectively what would be considered a vertical antenna. So imagine if you drew a line on your wall that's 39 inches long, 2 inches tall, right, and then 2 lines down from either side that's 2 inches, and then bridge that across the bottom. If you feed it from top to bottom, you have a vertical antenna, even though it's horizontally sort of laying. So it's I don't know. I think you really need to get John's book to understand what's going on, because I'm not doing it justice. And the point of the slot antenna is that radio communications or radio stations just before the TV era came out all had vertical antennas, and TV wanted to come in, and they're using lots of bandwidth, and they're creating a ton of spurious emissions, or they're desensing all these other antennas. And what is interesting is that they came across this slot antenna. So what they ended up doing with slot antennas, instead of trying to make massive horizontal antennas, which is a nightmare to try to keep all those long elements from sagging and flopping in the wind, is that you can make a vertical slot. So it's magnetically vertical, but it's electrically horizontal. So the TV antenna stations were nothing more than giant tall tubes with a slot in it, and that's how they did that. Now, because of the way the electromagnetic spectrum comes off of it, they don't interfere with the radio signals, and because of that, everybody was happy. But everybody just assumed that slot antennas are made for TV. Again, this is one of those things where I think all of us as humans, including myself, will go, well, yeah, that's a TV antenna. That's not a ham radio antenna. And John was like, literally turned it on its side. Goes, well, if you turn on its side, it suddenly is a really good ham radio antenna.
We had the great fortune of having John visit with us on a previous TechZoom podcast.
Yeah.
And he went over how the thing was designed and how to build one. And also Franco, K4VZ, just posted in the chat the note to editor to pick up the link out of the chat for that book on Amazon.
Yes. Yeah, it's Slot Antennas, Ham Radio's Forgotten Antenna. Yeah, and it's an absolute fascinating read or listen or whatever method that you consume the words.
We consume them in whatever way we can get them.
Yeah, exactly. Like I might be a sighted person, but I do a vast majority of my reading with audiobooks, including technical stuff. I don't know why, but the way my brain is wired, I seem to absorb things better if I listen to it than if I read it. So that's kind of the way I go.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an amazing presentation. It's interesting how it ties in with John, who, as I said, has visited with us previously. We're very familiar with his work.
Mhm.
And we seem to attract a lot of makers to these meetings. We've had John, we've had KF0FUL from Palomar Engineering,
Mhm.
who designed an antenna made out of a ladder,
Yes.
an HF antenna made out of a ladder. I thought that was pretty cool. And now you've got one that you made out of
Interestingly
Faraday
enough,
cloth.
he's also an aeronautical engineer.
That's right. He works in the aircraft industry.
Yeah. Well, maybe all of us have some problems. I don't know. We think differently than most, I guess. I don't know, but it's funny that you say that. There are a bunch of makers, and there is a certain amount of camaraderie that goes with that. But like, I worked as a freelance engineer just on my own for like 15 years before I got into the movies doing special effects. And the way I got the job in special effects is that there's a maker space here in town, and I was hanging out and I was talking to one of the people there, and they happened to work in special effects, and their supervisor needed a crazy engineer that would be willing to do some dangerous stuff. And she went to him and goes, "Oh, you should go talk to Ben." So, makers and inventors and tinkerers, I don't know. I think we're wired a little differently than the average Joe, because yeah, you look at the world as, I'll walk down an aisle, or feel your way through the world. You don't look at things as if what I have in front of me is, I can see a couple of dial calipers and, some different wires and stuff, and I can see about 5 different ways to make an antenna, where most people would just see a pile of garbage. And I don't know, maybe that's just the way we're wired.
Yeah, slight correction, Steve. Alan is KF0FUL. He's the one that come up with the
Did I not say Alan?
ladder antenna. Now Bob is from Palomar Engineering. He did.
Oh, that's right.
That's
right.
Just want to give Alan his.
Give him his due.
Absolutely, flight engineer for Bombardier.
Yeah. Right, that's quite all right.
Which used to be Learjet.
Yeah. But the one thing too is that I talk about, I'm always, because I'm sighted, I'm saying I'm looking at stuff and whatnot, but there's zero reason why you couldn't feel your way and make your own antennas, not even being sighted or even having poor sight, is that you can still make these things. Like, this is copper and duct tape is not out of the realm of people doing things and figuring out how to measure it and whatnot. I think it would be a fun challenge, but I always hate hearing about some people taking a look at disabilities or the way their life is and trying to find an excuse to not do things, when there really never is an excuse. Is it going to be harder to do or more difficult? More than likely, yeah, but that's not a reason not to do it.
Most of us look at it as, we don't worry about whether it's harder or easier. We just want to get it done.
Yeah, no, for sure. And
so, go ahead.
Well, recently, about a year and a half ago, so part of me getting my ham radio license is that I had what we thought was a stroke, but it wasn't a stroke. It was like an exceptionally bad migraine headache or something like that. But I was in the hospital for a few days, and we're still not sure exactly what caused it. But now I have a non-essential tremor. My hands shake really bad, and doing things the way I used to, I can't quite do things that way anymore. So but it doesn't keep me from, going out and doing a lot of this stuff, just like you said, is basically what I'm trying to get at. So, yeah.
Well understood. Now, with a 1,700 email list of people who are interested, obviously, one person can't make 1,700 of these things. Are you planning on going small production? You're going to train people how to make them?
Yes and no. So partly what I've done is that I've found a Chinese manufacturer to make the printed circuit boards, and they will do all the soldering and everything. So I just actually put in an order for 1,000. This is my second 1,000 bunch that I'm ordering. And with the fabric and the tape and stuff, the one thing that I'm finding difficult, and yes, I probably will hire somebody to do this, but laying it out properly so that all the measurements are good. I've built a jig at my shop to manage that, so I can do it repeatably and be able to do about 30 an hour. But that isn't sewing. So once I've laid it out onto the ribbon, is I'll send it out to different friends and family and go, hey, do you want, like, a few dollars per antenna? I pay $5 an antenna for people to come and sew out the outline, and then they send it back to me and I add all the pieces to it and glue everything together. But as far as mass manufacturing goes, I I'm considering it, but I'm still not absolutely convinced that I'm at the mass manufacturing stage yet. Like there's a viable business here, but like am I going to saturate the market really quick and then will it die off? So I have to be pretty careful about, if I go out and try to get 5,000 made, I got to be sure that I can sell the 5,000, because let's go back to me being in the movies. I haven't, because of the strikes and studios and everything the way they've been lately, is I haven't done any shows for actually about a year and a half, plus my little uh, headache incident that caused the shakes. I I I don't have any disposable income is basically what it boils down to. So I'm taking baby steps as I'm growing. I've got a lot of people asking me, like, where's the 70 centimeter version? Where's the GMRS version? Can you make a 6 meter version? There's the flag antenna. A lot of people want these things. I get that. But I'm only one guy and I'm growing slowly and cautiously, so that when I come out the end of this, whatever it is, whether it's a full-fledged business or it's just a side project, I'm not hurting is kind of what I'm shooting for.
Excellent
A
approach.
question about
Go ahead, Joel.
I got a question about the flag antenna.
Yeah.
Does it sag, or do you have some kind of support in the flag where it stays straight? I was curious about that.
It's a very good question. And I was, talking about a flag that would be hanging off of a balcony. And in that case, yeah, that one, you probably could get away with it. You would have like a pretty high takeoff angle. You'd want to sort of just have it horizontally laid out. And the problem with that is that when it flops around, it does affect the signal. These antennas are subject to wind. If my Faraday antennas get blown around too much, they don't transmit very well. So you really want to anchor both sides. So to answer your full question, is the flaggy, one of the videos I did on my site or on YouTube, is I made a cross support thing, sort of like a tent. And with that, I have poles going to each corner of the rectangle, and it spreads it out and makes it nice and taut, sort of like a board. And at that point, when you feed it and everything, then it performs incredibly well. In fact, I managed to get, I think it was a 60-mile contact off of 5 watts. And I ended up hitting a repeater that was close to 100 miles away. And they could hear me full quieting, but I couldn't hear them. I wasn't considering that a win or anything. But I like the idea that I was able to transmit far further than I could hear with 5 watts, which, kind of makes you giggle a little bit when you think about it, because it's absurd.
Well, here's an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And take this if you will. Make an antenna. Make a flag, not a United States flag or Canadian flag, but a flag with our call signs screen printed or embroidered in it, so we can display our call signs outside the house. But we're using it as a Yagi.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about doing that, and it's funny you mention that, because with the antennas that I do sell, there's a little $20 add-on where I'll do an iron-on and I'll take your call sign and I'll put it on the side of it. And I am looking at getting it embroidered, but having something so thin embroidered is a bit of a pain. But I don't know why it never occurred to me, but you're absolutely right. Is even better yet is maybe find somebody's their card and get all the graphics and everything from that, have that printed onto a piece of fabric, and then make that the antenna. So you have your QSL card flag.
Interesting. I've drawn a lot of antennas. I've gone down the single stick route. I've tried a couple of the Abrees. I've only get teased about those. A few other different ones. But this is the most innovative one that I've heard so far. So if I want to buy one, tell me how to do it.
Well, I got, again, as I was setting things up, I figured that I was getting contacted by other people other than hobbyists, like, the emergency services. So I decided that Ham Radio Rookie wouldn't necessarily make a good name for the company. So I call it VF Comms, or Velocity Factor Communications. And the URL is vfcomms.com. And if you go there, you can pick them up when they're on sale. I again, as most of you can understand, is I have problems keeping stock, and I can generally produce about 100 or 200 a week, depending on what's going on with the family. And that's trust me, I want these in everybody's hands, and it might be frustrating. You might have to sit on a list, but I will get you one eventually. You just have to be patient with me.
Oh, those of us who have ordered things like Shock RF hotspots and of late the Kenwood THD75A radios know all about waiting lists. We're very familiar with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a few people that were like, "Oh, great, another thing to be on a waiting list for," and I just like, "Oh, I didn't want to be that guy."
Franco has just posted the complete link for it in the chat. So note to the editor, you might want to pick that up out of the chat and give it to Joel for the podcast notes.
Yep.
Well, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight. And does anybody want to unmute and ask Ben anything about these antennas?
Yeah, I have a question for Ben. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Franco.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, is that antenna directional or not? Have you tried?
The Fara J is not directional. It says it might as well be a vertical whip. When you talk about the slot antennas, they can be directional if they're under the right circumstances, and then the flaggy is definitely directional. It's a Yagi for sure, and there's a definite forward gain on it.
Thanks.
Anybody else have anything? I'd like to thank you once again for joining us. Very informative. I know I'm going to sign up for a couple of these. Always have a extra antenna for something, and they're always handy. I don't do a lot of work in the field, but I do take my HT out for walks occasionally, and having a good antenna is a heck of a lot better than using the provided rubber duck, which we all know they're all horrible. So thanks once again for visiting with us, and as Joel and Angelo told you, we'll have the feed up in a couple of days. So might as well finish up. Anybody else have anything just before we close? One more time? Nothing heard?
So thank you, Ben, for coming, and we really enjoyed it.
I enjoy talking about it. It's I still haven't gotten tired of talking about these yet, because it's just
good.
absurd and fun. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thanks everybody for listening and for watching us on YouTube, those who did that. And if you haven't already done so, like, share, and subscribe. We need all the subscribers and shares we can get. For the Blind Hams Tech Podcasts, this is Steve, WV2KTV, saying 7-3 and good night.
7-3, everybody.
7-3. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and visit www.blindhams.com.